Howard Zinn. Tell us about him. Tell us about Columbus Day, how it began, and why all Americans have got to take up this battle.
Well, absolutely. Howard Zinn, now remember, he's a self-declared anarchist and Marxist. And he wrote a book which was really to destroy America. And it was called The People's History of America. And unfortunately, that book, he decided to go after our country by first starting with Columbus and fabricating lies and all types of misstatements about Columbus. You'd want to say almost that he was a novelist the way he wrote, but he really did it with a purpose. He started with Columbus to attack our country by taking the recognized basis of Columbus's history and distorting it to make him look like he was this atrocious person that invented slavery, that did all kinds of atrocities that were just not true. And that's been totally disproven by many scholars and books since that time. But what's most unfortunate, Bill, is that book and his teachings have been in the millions throughout our school system. And there's even something to this day called the Zinn Education Project that the NEA and lots of schools and curriculums are adopting, and they continue to perpetrate this America haters' lies about this country. Now behold this gem of all the wonder of the western sky, the emblem of the brave and true flag. Sorry, you scream out of the banner so high. Every heart will sing apart as all across the land we raise our voices far and near.
Bill McIntosh Show on now with Andre DiMino of the Italian American One Voice Coalition. In case you're wondering who he is, I'll tell you he's on the board. It's a very, very active organization, and it's there in the vanguard defending the heritage of Americans of Italian and Sicilian descent. Well, great. It's great to have you on the program, Andre. I've interviewed you before. Let the fireworks begin. How are you? How's everything in New Jersey? And how's it going with this great fight to preserve the integrity of the legacy of Christopher Columbus and the great people of Italian and Sicilian descent in our country who have been leaders in freedom?
Well, good to be back on with you, Bill, and I'm pleased to discuss it with you. We asked me how things are going in New Jersey. Well, we've been in some battles. We've won some battles, but we've got to win the war. This attack on Columbus is really an attack not only on Italian Americans, but really on America. And that's why we've got to go after all of these places that are trying to change our history.
Right. And this is folks, keep in mind, this is a fight that people, they carry on with their lives, they do things, and then at one moment, at a certain point, the outrage becomes too great. And Andre is somebody who, this is not his full-time thing, I don't think. He's an engineer and the CEO of a medical devices company in northern New Jersey. He's further proof that America is basically have been tremendously benefited by Italian Americans and Sicilian Americans doing great things for our country. As you once said colorfully, they think America is basically, when it comes to Italian Americans and Sicilians, are basically, gangsters, brutes, and bimbos, as you once said, which I thought was funny, but at the same time, it gives me a lot of anger. If you look at the Second World War, one of the, I think probably the #1 ethnic group fighting for our country, and that great conflict were Italian Americans and Sicilian Americans.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, no, absolutely, Bill. It was the largest single percentage of ethnicity that was fighting in World War II for America. But at the same time, people don't know this, but they were interring Italians that were here in this country because of the situation that Italy was part of the Axis. So while the Italian Americans were fighting overseas, they were interring people here, just like they did with the Japanese. I didn't know that. Yeah, Italian Americans. That's amazing. Yeah, they were interred in what was called Camp Victory in Missoula, Montana. They took them mostly from the West Coast. These were Italians with shops and individuals that were leading normal lives, and they interred them there. And that's why right now there's a very large percentage of Italian Americans in Missoula, Montana.
All right. Well, I know where I'm going to go for a good Italian meal in Montana. I mean, it's amazing. It's something, a little other footnote you may not know. There were a lot of Italians who fought for us. They basically, I guess they were underarmed with Mussolini. Mussolini was defeated, and they changed bands. They went to work for the U.S. Army. They had a patch that had an eye on it, and there were like 500,000, maybe more.
Absolutely correct, Bill. You're a good student of history. That's true.
Well, I studied history, and I'm a proud descendant of those of Italian American descent. And something else that people need to know was that there are actually a couple of people who signed the Declaration of Independence: William Pocket and Caesar Rodney.
Correct.
And in the Revolutionary War, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of Italians that fought. Right?
Yeah, there was a battalion of over 1,500 Italians that fought on behalf of the colonists and in the revolution on our side, in essence.
Okay, Howard Zinn, tell us about him. Tell us about Columbus Day, how it began, and why all Americans have got to take up this battle.
Well, absolutely. You know, Howard Zinn, now remember, he's a self-declared anarchist and Marxist. And he wrote a book which was really to destroy America. And it was called The People's History of America. And unfortunately, that book, he decided to go after our country by first starting with Columbus and fabricating lies and all types of misstatements about Columbus. You know, you'd want to say almost that he was a novelist the way he wrote, but he really did it with a purpose. He started with Columbus to attack our country by taking the recognized basis of Columbus's history and distorting it to make him look like he was this atrocious person that invented slavery, that did all kinds of atrocities that were just not true. And that's been totally disproven by many scholars and books since that time. But what's most unfortunate, Bill, is that book and his teachings have been in the millions throughout our school system. And there's even something to this day called the Zinn Education Project that the NEA and lots of schools and curriculums are adopting, and they continue to perpetrate this America haters lies about this country. We warned about this a number of years ago, that attacking Columbus because of Zinn is really an attack on our country, and that's coming so true now.
Well, sure. You have Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. You have the Columbia space module during the Apollo 11 flight. Why on earth would they call it that? Because Columbus was emblematic of America. And, you know, you have Columbus, Ohio. Why on earth are they doing this? Is they're trying to take down America. That's what people have to see.
You know,
give us the. Go ahead.
No, you bring up a good point. In fact, that was why President Harrison actually selected the 400th anniversary of Columbus in order to counteract and apologize to the significant discrimination and denigration that Italian Americans had back in those days. You know, it was the 1890s to the 1920s. There was tremendous discrimination against Italian Americans. And actually, the single largest lynching in U.S. history, many people don't know this, was in New Orleans in 1891 when 11 innocent Italian Americans were lynched. And then for the next year, President Harrison, to atone and apologize for that, declared Columbus Day as a great American holiday. And that's why Italian Americans have revered Columbus as an iconic symbol, as that apology or atonement, and, you know, became a national holiday, a federal holiday. And that's why we fight so hard for it, because Columbus Day and Columbus is such an important symbol to Italian Americans.
Right. I want to give you an opportunity to give us the historical context for 1492.
Yeah, well, if you got to realize, of course, that Columbus was seeking out a route to India and the Far East as a trading route. He was a great navigator. He was also a man of religion, a Christian, and he set sail to find that new route. He ended up, now people say he didn't discover America. Of course not. He didn't discover America, but he landed in this part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere, and he landed on the island. And then because from that time, from 1492, he opened up the route with his 4 additional voyages and then all the colonization that occurred after him. So it was like the moon landing of our time. It was really an incredible feat for him to go across the Atlantic, uncharted waters, and then to be able to land in this area and then help to colonize it with his voyages and subsequent voyages. So that's why, you know, many scholars consider Columbus to be the most important person in history, because he united the continents, he united this world. And in essence, that's probably why some people are attacking him, because they're against Western culture and they're against what's happened to unite the world. And that's why, you know, we're fighting as Italian Americans, but we're also fighting as proud Americans.
Right. And so one thing I would say, I mean, I would differ with you on that one. I would say this, though. He is attacked, he's emblematic, and he's the one that brought the greatest man ever in history as a Catholic Christian. That's Jesus Christ.
Correct.
And he came there with a banner of Christianity. And Howard Zinn knew exactly what he was doing. He was an enemy. He had to have been against Christianity. And he attacks Columbus. He attacks the Europeans, the European incredible contribution to humanity. And, you know, we have this something that's called frequently the Colombo-American exchange. And what was it? Columbus's voyages brought European culture. They brought Christianity. They brought things like sugarcane. They brought things like a number of crops. Well, among them, of course, I believe was rice, sugar, as I mentioned, citrus. They brought domestic husbandry, cattle. They brought swine. They brought, I think there was some domestication of poultry, but basically I think largely animal husbandry on a great scale, sheep. And they came to America, the Americas, and these domesticated animals found incredibly fertile terrain, and the populations exploded. The sugar industry is one that also brought about tremendous trade, for good or for ill, which brings me to my next topic, which I'm about to bring up. But the Colombo-American exchange, which also created a new race of people, what they call the Creoles, or people, you know, basically of mixed race, of all races, Black, Hispanic, you know, European, of course, Indigenous, Oriental, all of them came together. And Christopher Columbus was the one that really was at the forefront of this. He was the beginning of it all. He was the catalyst. He was the great initiator. And that's something that has to be stated. Now, of course, slavery it's undeniable that we had slavery. We've had slavery in the New World. But tell us about slavery. This was not simply just a unique America's only type of institution, was it?
No, in fact, and getting back to Zinn, you know, when you read his book, he tries to really just whitewash the whole situation back then of the indigenous people. You know, indigenous people were replete with slavery. That was what they did among these tribes, and there was even cannibalism and so forth. So, you know, when they say that, you know, Columbus brought slavery, it's just not true. You know, slavery was throughout the world. Columbus himself was not a slaver, but yet when he got to this part of the world, he actually worked with some of the tribes like the Taino tribe in pushing back against the Carib tribe, who were cannibals and attacking the Tainos. In fact, you know, 4 books were written by someone of Taino heritage, of indigenous heritage, Rafael Ortiz, totally disputing all these falsehoods that Zinn brought up about Columbus. So, you know, when you talk about those times, you know, indigenous people, this was no Garden of Eden when Columbus got here. But that's what Zinn wanted to portray, that this was some Garden of Eden that Columbus destroyed. And it's just totally false.
Well, there was human sacrifice practiced on a wide scale, cannibalism that you mentioned, slavery. Hey, it existed in Asia, you know, among the Chinese, people in the Middle East. In fact, regarding the slavery in the Americas, what happened was, who were the slavers? The slavers, of course, there were the white Europeans that bought them. They sold them in the Americas. They sold them in the Caribbean. They sold them in the United States and in South America and Latin America. But who got the slaves? Who caught the slaves? Who captured the slaves? They were Africans, African tribes, competing tribes, or Arab Muslims that were involved in the slave trade. And this is something that there's a phenomenon that's been going on for centuries. And one little interesting footnote to this is that there were actually slave raids on white European places in Italy. Probably must have happened in Sicily, in Spain, as far as Iceland and as Ireland. There was an entire village, almost 99.9% of the village of Baltimore was carried off on a slave raid that took place in the 17th century. So slavery and slaving is something that has been unfortunately universal to the world culture. It's not just a phenomenon that had to do with something that Columbus introduced. That's far from the truth at all. That's totally erroneous to make that statement. But again, nevertheless, this is happening. So tell us about, you know, when Columbus Day became inaugurated as basically an American holiday, and why that's significant, that's being under attack.
Yeah, well, certainly, as I said, President Harrison declared 1892's Columbus Day as an atonement or apology as a day of national patriotism. And then later on in 1937, it was actually made into a federal holiday. And since that time, we say it's an Italian-American holiday, but it's a great American holiday. But Italian-Americans especially, I can give you a personal story. Both my parents came from Sicily. And when my grandfather was in Sicily, he was actually a fisherman. He had his own boats, and he was a fisherman, as many Sicilians on the coast would do. When he came to America, they said the streets were paved with gold, and he came here in the early 1900s, and he couldn't get a job. And unfortunately, at that time, when he did get a job, it was on the docks of New York. And when he got that job, he was paid less than any other ethnicity, including African Americans or blacks, because Italians were discriminated against between the 1890s and 1920s. But I can tell you this, Bill, when Columbus Day rolled around, that was a proud day for my grandfather. That was a day where he felt that he was connected. He was so happy to be American. He was so happy to be in this part of the world. But Columbus Day was that special day because of the Columbus parades, all of the celebrations, the feasts, and so forth. And that's why personally it goes back for me on a personal basis, but also for so many other people that have their ancestors that came here. And that was a day when Italian Americans were accepted and celebrated their patriotism because of that special day. So we can't give that up. And as Americans, we shouldn't give it up, because when you take Columbus down, you're actually taking away the basis or the foundation of our culture.
Right, and one of that is solidarity, harmony, social harmony. Let's face it, we've had a lot of strife in our country.
Absolutely.
But let me tell you something. The idea of Columbus is a person that brings people together, and the idea that we can have one ethnic group, Hispanics, basically take over that holiday and replace one ethnicity or one, let's say, group of descendants in our country and replace it for the sake of another is outrageous. I mean, basically what we're saying is, hey, all these bad things happened, and this has got to be Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's all about Hispanics, and because let's face it, largely, I mean, huge numbers of Hispanics in the United States are of mixed descent, as huge numbers of Americans are of different descent. I mean, the idea that somehow that they can come in, or interest groups, lobbying groups, cultural Marxists can come in, kick out this great holiday that celebrates all Americans, and then make it about one particular aggrieved group is terrible. This is just all.
Well, I got to tell you, Bill, I got to just slight correct you on one thing. It's not just terrible. It's actually a violation of the U.S. Constitution. I'll tell you why. Italian Americans are a recognized group under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And therefore, that by substituting one group over another is discrimination on our Constitution. And we're actually using that. Our organization filed a landmark federal lawsuit against the town of West Orange, New Jersey, in federal court, because they took down the monument in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day, and they took down the Columbus Monument. So we're suing in federal court, and because of our suit, which was instituted, there are now many other suits that are being proposed for the same reason. You really shouldn't discriminate one group against the other, but unfortunately, they're pitting indigenous people against Italian Americans, and it's just wrong to pit people against each other. We should all be united, just as you said. We're a country here, we're an experiment where everything was united. We should all be proud Americans first, and we are proud Americans first, but we respect our Italian heritage, and that shouldn't be taken away from us by these towns and cities.
Amen. So tell us about the Italian American One Voice Coalition. Is it open to people who are not of Italian Sicilian descent?
Absolutely, yes. We have a number of members that are not. And what Italian American One Voice Coalition, if you look at our mission statement, of course, it's to preserve and counteract the stereotyping and discrimination of Italian Americans, but it's also to all groups that are persecuted against. In fact, we worked with the Hibernians one time when there was an attack with respect to an artist that was depicting the Irish badly, and we work with the Irish groups and others as well. We don't want to see anybody discriminated against. Of course, our primary thing is Italian Americans. Our group was founded 30 years ago by Dr. Manny Alfano, and we fight stereotyping, discrimination, and all types of abuse against Italian Americans, like removing our symbol, Columbus. We're dedicated to doing that in all phases of media and so forth. Just like you mentioned before, as I said, Italian Americans are the last ethnicity that it's okay to bash. Every time you see us in media, we're either bimbos or buffoons or mafiosos or mobsters, and that's just not right.
Totally true. Among the people that I like to talk about are Joe Pistone, who worked as one of the most illustrious undercover agents for the FBI. He infiltrated organized crime. He infiltrated it, and he helped bring down tremendous numbers of people that were involved in, in organized crime. There have been so many outstanding Italian Americans and Sicilian Americans that the story needs to be told, and it's not being told. Unfortunately, we have this fascination with the mafia, but it really takes away from the great Americans like Rudy Giuliani, who basically saved New York. New York was going down the drain.
Absolutely.
And he did so much to help that great city. And as you know, he was a mayor during the 9/11 attacks. He's a man of great leadership. But that's just two great Americans of Italian and Sicilian descent. There have been so many, and the Italian American One Voice Coalition is one that is basically in the leadership to promote the idea that this ethnicity has done great things for our country. Well, I want to say to you, Andre, thanks so much for being part of the Bill McIntosh Show. Hope to have you on again. We've got to get organized. I hope we can find with your organization a way to channel the outrage that a lot of people feel about this attack on Columbus. What can they do locally to fight this fight?
Well, that's a great point, Bill. And we're really so pleased. For example, we had a great example of that recently where the Randolph school system was changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And we had the local residents from the town of Randolph come out. We had about 150 at the first meeting, and then we called a press conference. We had a bunch of people came there, and then emergency meeting was called, and over 400 people showed up and spoke for 3.5 hours.
Or that you actually never set foot in a Randolph school because Italian culture, history, or heritage is not anywhere in the curriculum. Show other districts you are objective and balanced and open-minded. Correct your procedures and be transparent. Be truly inclusive. Stop pitting one group against another. Rightfully celebrate Indigenous people.
It's time.
On the days already dedicated to them.
Mr. Piroli,
If you stand your vote on the Columbus Day name change, I call on you to restore the second Monday of October permanently to Columbus Day.
Mr. Piroli, that's time.
And the Italian.
We're going to ask you to respect the clock, please.
I call on you to respect our civil rights, and I ask you for an apology to Italian Americans.
And we got the school board to change it.
Oh, wow.
We got it back on the calendar there, and we're doing that in other places. So what your point is very well taken. We want everyone to join with us. When you see them attacking Columbus, they're really attacking the foundations of our culture, not just Italian Americans, but America. So stand up, join with us, and let's push back. We're doing it at the school boards. We got to do it at mayors and council meetings. We're doing it at state legislatures. Fight for Columbus, fight for America, and be there to support the Italian American One Voice Coalition and anybody that speaks out against the foundations of our heritage.
Yeah, if you believe in Christianity, if you want to fight for Christianity, you want to fight for Columbus. Okay, folks? So Andre DiMino, Italian American One Voice Coalition, Godspeed to you, your organization. You're great people, and let's start this fight, folks. We've only got a couple of days before Columbus Day, so keep it up.